This is the Sunday stream opening song because the other song is copyrighted. La 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 la. Oh look, here comes Dog Cat Fox.
Hi, Sky.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Sunday stream. The stream I do on Sundays because Sunday is the day to stream on Sundays. Hope you're all doing well this beautiful Sunday morning. It's definitely lighter out on a Sunday morning this weekend than it was last weekend as we slowly crawl our way towards 2 days again that are longer than about 10 minutes. Who's joining me this morning before I get into the wonderful world of what we're up to? Absolutely Degenerate, good morning. Noah Sencio, good morning. Twisted Skipster, good morning. Shady Grin, good morning. Funtime Bats, good morning. Mike R., good morning. Matt Barnes, good morning. Keeverdam, good morning. Who else is here? Shadow Claw, good morning. And TC, good morning. Resolute Germ, good morning. TFAorix, good morning. Rotten Corpse, good morning. Arc210, good morning. Mike Savage, good morning. Simon Willikins, good morning. Robert Gruber, good morning. Spoonie the Rebel, good morning. And is that everybody? I hope so. Oh, Somnamnul Nation, good morning. And then Dax Orion wanted me to call him like Magistrate Dax von Waffle House or something. It has since scrolled up past the top of the chat box, so I apologize, Dax, if I got that wrong, but that's as close as my memory recalls. Robert Pincus, good morning. But yes, so I hope everybody's doing well. For those of you that have Monday off for the federal holiday here in the States, I hope you enjoy that. But predicating to that, whatever that means, I was, those of you that saw the test stream I did yesterday where I tried out some video game attempt, I'm obviously not equipped yet to do that correctly or clearly because no sound was coming out of the video game. The image was choppy and cut off, and I didn't know what I was doing. I was trying to decide what to do for today's show. It was either going to be another Border News Digest, possibly the video game thing. If that one experiment had worked out well, maybe I would have tried that. But instead, I thought I'd check out some education, some educational stuff. I don't think I've done something on classrooms recently, but I found this presentation from the let me get this right here, the Idaho State University. And as far as I can tell, it is a educational guidebook for budding teachers of grade schools on how to create inclusive pedagogies in the classroom. That's the official title. Strategies to create inclusive pedagogies in the classroom. So we have a panel discussion of educators and proto-educators, I suppose, on how to achieve this. Now, the whole thing goes on for about an hour and 15 minutes, as far as I could tell, because with these kind of things, I always check a little bit to make sure there's not anything at the beginning where they spend 20 minutes going over the calendar of events for their department. So as far as I know, we don't have to worry about that. If we encounter something like that I just missed along the way, I'll try to skip over it. But yeah, so I wanted to find out, and this was posted from something that just occurred within the last, I guess, couple of weeks. This is very recent. This is new stuff to find out how we can create inclusive classrooms. Yeah, I don't know if I have any more preamble on that, but like always, I want to find out what is the latest thinking, what is the cutting edge thinking on introducing inclusion, diversity, equity, and so on into classrooms with, impressionable children and what the philosophies are thereof. Is that enough preamble? Is that allowed time for people to get in? Is everybody in? Is everybody in? All right. So with that, we'll start off with a few seconds for a sound test. You guys tell me if you can hear it, and then we'll proceed and try to find out how to become inclusive in our classrooms.
Thank you all for coming. It looks like we have a really big group today.
Yeah.
My name is Margaret Johnson. I am the interim coordinator for the program for instructional effectiveness.
Instructional effectiveness. Ooh, you guys hear that all right? And good morning, meh. include your grandparents in the classroom. Yeah, that'd be interesting. Get a perspective on how things have changed. Oh boy, the stories they would tell, right?
And I really want to thank you all for being here today.
Okay.
I do want to mention that we are recording this session, and it will be available on the PI website within a few weeks.
Okay.
Today's event is being co-hosted by the Diversity Resource Center, and I'm pleased to say that we're joined by Khalil Azizi from the Resource Center today. Thanks for your participation in this event. We much appreciate it. And today's session will focus on creating equitable classroom environments.
Creating equitable classroom environments. I thought it was strategies for creating inclusive pedagogies, but okay, equitable classroom environments. I am morbidly curious to find out what that means, but also, and I was just thinking about this earlier before I started the show, also, with this large group of individuals, I don't know how many are actually going to be talking, but will we receive, unlike so many presentations in the past, will we receive any specific examples of what they're talking about? Like, how do you create an equitable classroom? What steps would you actually take? What does a non-equitable classroom look like versus an equitable classroom? And how do you achieve this change? That's what I'm hoping to hear, at least in summary.
And I'm delighted that we have 3 speakers today.
Okay.
They are Samantha Blatt from Anthropology,
Okay.
Nishan Borden from Counseling,
Mm-hmm.
and Mona Hearn from College of Education.
Mm-hmm.
Each of our presenters today will start off with their thoughts about how to best create equitable classroom environments.
Excellent.
And once the 3 of them have completed their presentations, we will open up the session for questions and discussion. And we're looking forward to lots of great ideas from all of you who are here today.
Okay, and just as a note, I'm going to be going for an hour and a half in real time, regardless of how much of this we get through, unless I feel it deems more time. And if they have a question and answer session, sometimes that's interesting in and of itself. So we'll see as we go. Also, before I forget, up at the top of the chat box, if you would cast your gaze for a moment to the links to the fundraisers for our friends Moonshock and Angry Illinoisian. Both of them have been going through some medical issues of late, and their family could certainly use some support if you guys have a couple of bucks to throw their direction. So I appreciate you guys giving that consideration. Or if you're unable to donate, which is understandable after the holidays and everything and given the economy, if you are able to at least share those links out on social media, that as well would be much appreciated. So thank you for that.
So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and have us get started.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe Sam is the first one up.
What, no land acknowledgement? We're not going to do a land acknowledgement first? Oh, okay. Well, all right.
Hi, everybody.
Hi.
I'm really happy to be here to continue to talk about inclusive teaching and how to make our environments better for our students. And so I'm an assistant professor in the anthropology department. I'm a biological anthropologist. And so some of my thinking goes towards that direction, working in North America and from the biological framework. And so some of my examples are from that. So.
Okay. Did the sound cut out for you guys too?
There are a lot of
okay,
ideas about what inclusiveness is. And so I'm really going to talk about it from my perspective and how I've used inclusivity in the classroom. And my 2 examples here are from 2 different communities, a community of students that are blind or low vision students, specifically in how I can involve them in STEM, and more specifically how I've faced challenges in my anthropology introduction to biological anthropology class and the lab component of that, which is a general ed class. And the second community is that of Indigenous students. And there are similarities between these 2 communities and many that we might want to have inclusion for. And those really fall into the spectrum of these are marginalized and generally underrepresented students. They come from cultural backgrounds that are different and perspectives that are different from a lot of students in the classroom. And that through their education, there have been gaps in their learning experiences that don't necessarily accommodate them coming into the normalized Western classroom. There's generally a lack of mentors that they have prior to even coming to a university. And for instructors, there's a lack of awareness and of the resources and their particular needs as well. And so that's
okay. That's interesting. I can't recall very often that I've seen a educator or anybody bring up a demographic of a very specific disability, physical disability. At the same time, I find it a little odd that you would group being indigenous along the same category of having a physical disability. Maybe I'm reading too much into that. I don't know. Indigenous students. So are you talking about Native Americans, I'm assuming, because this is Idaho? Okay.
kind of where my background coming into these examples is from. And so
and underrepresented. Okay, again, this whole idea of representation. You're not there to represent a demographic. Okay, you're a student. You might have a disability. You might be from a particular ethnic background, but you're an individual. You're not an avatar of a broader sort of, statistical demographic. So that always sets me a little aside because I'm like, talk about them as people, not as percentages.
I'm going to give some little tiny background of their perspectives and then mostly focus on how I've put this into practice, how I've tried to have these students included by giving you some examples that I've used in the classroom that I think actually work for all students and both of these communities as well.
Okay, examples I love. I want examples. I want specific things that you're doing for these specific communities.
And then give you some of those collaborative resources that I've actually worked on. And so my idea of inclusive teaching.
Whoa! Back up! You didn't even list off what's on your card here. Okay, I'm going to read off her card because she doesn't tell us. 2 communities: blind and low vision students in STEM. Specifically, okay, and then 2 indigenous students, but not specifically in STEM, marginalized and underrepresented, and bullet points below that, different cultural perspectives than most students. I'm sure Blind Press would my friend on YouTube, Blind Press, might correct me on this, but does being blind or having low vision immediately put you into a different cultural perspective? No pun intended on the perspective part. I don't know. Gaps in learning experiences that accommodate perspective, isolating, whatever. Okay. Lack of relatable mentors. Define relatable. Like you're the only mentors that are relatable to a blind or low vision person is another blind or low vision person. I guess depending on the circumstances, that might be true. I think of at least in fiction, I think of Matt Murdock and Stick. Lack of awareness of resources and needs. Okay. Brief background of perspectives, putting into practice with examples for all students and collaborative resources. Okay. Continue.
And then give you some of those collaborative resources that I've actually worked on. And so my idea of inclusive teaching is really centered on having students have that feeling of belonging. And from that, helping them engage in the classroom, which should help them hopefully achieve and then retain them so that they can graduate and reach their educational goals.
Not to sound like a know-it-all or anything, but is any part of that any different than what a regular old-fashioned classroom conceivably would be doing, or a teacher? Trying to get the students engaged, regardless of what they look like, their disabilities or otherwise, or accounting for those things, getting them engaged in the material, getting them to participate, and so on. I'm not saying she's wrong. I'm not saying that she's like saying something that's incorrect or whatever. I just wonder, like, how is that not just teaching a classroom 101 type of ideas? Like what specifically makes this quote unquote inclusive and or equitable and or so on? I mean, maybe she'll get to that. It's just on the offset. I'm just like,
And most students seem to leave school because of things that we might be able to change as far as inclusive practices. Things
Leave school. What do you mean? Like quit? Like you're talking about dropout? And if she doesn't specify, and I hope she does, what grade levels is she referring to?
like unhappiness or being made to feel like their needs and values are being approached by indifference. And so these are things that relate to this sense of belonging that is really important for my understanding of inclusive teaching.
Okay.
And so incorporating or providing an outlet for their values and their particular cultures and backgrounds and perspectives might be able to aid in their belonging and then engagement. I use a lot of anecdotes about struggle that everyone shares.
Okay, whoa. Providing an outlet that values culture, background, and perspective, like what? And I'm asking rhetorically, I'm hoping she'll answer, like, what kind of outlet are you referring to? Give me an actual active example. Anecdotes about struggle. Anecdotes about struggle? Okay, again, what does that look like in the classroom setting? Give me an example where you gave an anecdote about struggle. Why struggle?
And really anecdotes about struggle and issues that anybody has in life, especially in regards to education, starts at the top. And what I mean by that is the instructor. And so I'm generally very open about my own struggles in various forms because it seems to open that up and make it normative.
Like what? How much of your personal life are you sharing with your students, and to what effect? I was getting hopeful when she's saying she's going to be using examples, but so far it's all still very generalized and vague.
For other students. And as well as trying to create affinity and self-awareness of all students and really understand the place and space that they're in to make that relevant to them and then bring out a comfort level that essentially will work with engagement. And so that's...
Well, okay. Good Lord. Meaning what? Explain this, please. I hope the subsequent cards here will get into the nitty gritty of what you're talking about. Like, how? Give me an anecdote that you've shared with your students that stands out as an anecdote about struggle. Like, are you talking about like, I know math can be difficult. I had blah 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 test in school. That kind of thing. You know, just trying to relate and trying to that could make some sense. But I don't know what you're talking about. And especially these days where we've seen some teachers, a lot of teachers end up sharing way too much about their personal lives with their students as a way to normalize certain ideas and things. It's a little, not quite a red flag being raised, but I can kind of see the hand going up slightly.
General overall of where I'm talking about.
Okay.
And so inclusiveness is also needs to be intentional. So you need to start off really thinking about it. I sort of fell into some of these things, and you can do off the fly changes in your course. But
does this look like a page out of some like Necronomicon book to anybody else? What is all of this? For those of you listening at home, there is this kind of shuriken-shaped graph or idea chart or something up alongside a big list of bullet points. Openness, listening, empathy, patience, accepted, validated, appreciated, treated fairly, and then some text that I'm having a hard time read. Presume competence and positive intent, repair harm and restore relationship, dignity honored. Okay.
But it really should be something that's intentional. And the first way you can do this is by self-reflection of your own biases and stereotypes. And one thing that can help, and this can help other students too in courses, is this Harvard implicit bias assessment, which you can just do online. And there's various groups in which you can do these quizzes.
The implicit bias assessment. You know, a couple of my earliest videos had to do with the implicit bias assessment and how much garbage it is ultimately for determining how someone sees the world versus just some reflexes versus actual descriptions of morals or values. But okay, the implicit bias test.
And at the end, it sort of tells you which group you have biases towards. And so even if you don't notice that you have biases, everybody does. And so it can bring us down to more of an even playing ground if you have sort of a quantitative way of saying, yeah, there are these things that I haven't been open to or haven't realized. And so avoiding making assumptions about our students backgrounds based on everything from their names to what their clothing is and from where they're from.
Wait. Okay. And given the fact that you haven't been any more specific to this point, I don't have anything else to work with, but you don't want to make assumptions about your students based on their clothing, yet you're going to group them by a common disability and or a common ancestry and make assumptions about whether or not they're marginalized, whether or not they have mentors, whether or not they have an educational experience that you agree with or think is relevant. Okay. No, you've already this is the problem. You're trying to cure bias with bias. You're trying to cure stereotypes by employing stereotypes. This is the kind of thing that just completely baffles me when I hear these explanations of their intentions and their methods.
You absolutely need to do that, and they need to sort of get in a position where they can do that themselves in the classroom.
What does this have to do with becoming better at reading, writing, doing math, knowing history, geography? What does sitting there and contemplating what some test somewhere may or may not say about my reflexive, quote unquote, biases against or for certain groups, certain demographics? What do you do with that knowledge? What happens with a student who has a test that shows they have biases? What do you do with that? As a teacher, as an educator, now that you've taken time out of their day to put them through a implicit bias test, what do you do with those results? How does that inform your interaction with that student after the fact? What does that tell you about how to best educate that student? What does any of this have to do with improving the classroom experience for the student? And how does this exactly work? Do you take a day out of your schedule to put all of the kids through an implicit bias test? And what happens after that? And what does any of that have to do with furthering their academics?
I try to convey confidence in them, give them the benefit of the doubt initially, try to have them be collaborative partners.
Give them the benefit of the doubt initially for what? About their biases? Wait, what? Wait. Back up.
About our students backgrounds based on everything from their names to what their clothing is and from where they're from. You absolutely need to do that, and they need to sort of get in a position where they can do that themselves in the classroom. I try to convey confidence in them, give them the benefit of the doubt initially, try to have them be collaborative parts in the classroom where they can contribute themselves to things that are or not working.
What?
Don't treat students as monoliths to whatever group they are from.
Don't treat students as monoliths. Now, by the way, let me tell you about these two specific demographics that I've assumed are deficient in ways beyond the surface level. Oh yeah, I mean, they might not be able to see that well, but they're on the same table as someone who's an indigenous student. Are you listening to yourself, lady? I mean, setting aside the fact that even with all of your promises of examples, you have yet to give us an actual example of how this works on the ground in the classroom, or what the benefit of any of this is to a student's academic achievement. But oh yeah, don't monolith anybody. No, don't monolith anybody. But I already know that if you're an indigenous student, you lack these things. If you're a visually impaired student, you lack these things, and you need special attention for these things. You don't offer up any proof of this, right? But you just know you can take these two very different demographics of some people who have an identifiable physical disability and then people who just happen to come from a particular heritage. Oh, okay, keep going.
Don't make examples of them. This is a good example is from the one community I'll talk about is Indigenous students. Looking at an Indigenous student and saying, well, you can tell us all about this. That puts them on the spot.
You just told us that you already assume to know the deficiencies or the perspectives that they are coming to the classroom with based on their heritage. You did that in your first slide. Oh, but now you can't say, oh, well, tell us about this thing. You're the one who's assuming to know their mind and their culture and their perspective on things before you've even met them. You just have to look at them and have some notion of their heritage, and you already know what slot to put them into. Okay. But you're correct. You see, here's the thing. On doubling back on yourself, a broken clock is right twice a day, right? Okay, you're correct. Yeah, just because a kid happens to be, a student, don't know what age we're talking about here, but a student happens to come, at least physically speaking, from a particular heritage or background, that does not inherently make them an expert in whatever culture you assume them to be attached to. You're correct. How many times in movies have we seen where somebody is trying to interpret someone who's speaking, an Asian language, and they turn to the first Asian person they see, and that person looks at them and says, dude, I was born in Brooklyn, or something like that, right? It's like, I don't speak Korean or whatever. I'm thinking of, was it Falling Down? I think that joke was in Falling Down. Anyway. Okay, go on.
It stereotypes what their experience is. And in that vein, you can practice perspective taking with students with various assignments where they, even if it's as simple as playing devil's advocate. And this all begins at the door of the classroom, or at the door, where you say hello. You make sure people know who you are as the instructor, but that they understand that they're there. Learn their names.
Yeah, that's called having a seating chart and calling out people's names at the top of every class. Yeah, this is nothing new. It was done when I was a child, and that's a long time ago now. Okay, again, it's not bad advice. I don't know why it sounds like it's something revelatory.
If you can, depending on the size of the class, but start it immediately. And so that it's not just a person isolated in front of the room, but trying to build a community from that and belonging from that.
Yeah.
Syllabus obviously is another intentional way that you can have inclusivity. So what are the norms of how students should be talking to each other? And I'll give some examples of that.
I hope you do. And also, would you mind telling us what grades are you referring to here? I mean, when you talk about syllabus and lecture language, it sounds to me like this is higher education. We're talking about college classes and things like that. So presumably students who are already hopefully of age and have the intelligence and have gone through grade school and so on. And so some of these things shouldn't be your responsibility to teach the students how to conduct themselves or behave in a classroom setting. But at the same time, since you're not saying, I don't know, is this meant for high school to college students, or is this meant for elementary students? Or are you saying that some of this stuff is just universal? And, some of it is, at least getting to know the names of your students, although I doubt most of my college professors could have been bothered to do so, but
a land acknowledgement and an acknowledgement of resources for students that are
land acknowledgement
by certain strains and stresses during the class is a pretty simple but very intentional thing to have. I'll show you mine in a few slides.
Okay.
You should also talk about, it's okay if you're sick or if there's a holiday. I want to know what's happening so that we can work through absences or work through missing of work. And for me, I usually have to say this many, many times before students will actually approach me with things that are happening in their lives.
Well, maybe they don't feel like it's your business. If they have an absence for something, maybe they'll just tell you, I had to go, I had a family emergency, or I was sick, and they don't want to get into it. Again, but either way, all of this sounds very boilerplate to just how you have to deal with a classroom or students, or heck, even employees in some instances. So what?
Even explaining office hours, and on the syllabi, I actually try to do that now, where I say like office hours means I'm sitting there waiting for you to come speak with me about what it is you need to speak with me about.
Yes.
That you're not invading my space or my time, because not everybody understands that. It's not a universal thing that students come in knowing.
Okay.
And so that
you're not even going to go over your chart, your throwing star chart of empathy and restorative, etc. Okay.
This is one of my examples for one of my syllabi of my inclusivity statement.
Good Lord.
Things like if you have another name or you use certain pronouns, or if there are parts of the class where you have a perspective that is different than ours and we're not including that, like just let me know at any time during the class, because even in a science class like this is from, there are perspectives, and science is created by people that.
Yeah. So what do you say to those people that say that there are more than two genders in a science class? What do you say to such students that might bring up such things? I'd be curious to know, as a biological anthropologist, what you have to say about that one.
Have their own backgrounds, and so that is part of trying to understand science, is understanding who's writing the science. And so
what part of understanding the science is understanding who's writing the science? You know what? If I never knew the names of the authors of a scientific theory, but I could test that theory absent the personalities behind it, and it remained true, you know what? It wouldn't matter. Either something is true and testable, or it isn't. And it doesn't matter who authored it. That's the fun thing about science. If it can be replicated by other people, absent any other biases or backgrounds or whatever else, it's generally accepted as good science. If I never knew the name Isaac Newton, but somebody explained to me, or I saw written down somewhere with the name burned away, the theory of gravity, I'd be like, oh, wow, that makes a lot of sense. And besides which, even if you knew the truth about Isaac Newton, who was a nutbag alchemist, would that somehow, what would that tell you? Theory of gravity, but also thought he could turn lead into gold if he tried hard enough. I
try to make them feel comfortable with speaking about that. So my first community here is, I basically had my first blind student attend my lab course, and he had other classes where he wasn't successful and accommodations weren't made for him. And blind and low vision is the most common disability, and there's a range within that disability, but there's also a range of assistive technologies that I didn't know about, that I assume most instructors do not know about. Everything from magnification to kinesthetic technology can be used, but unless you research it and try to incorporate it in other ways in a normal sense, you won't know about those things.
Now, see, this is where I'm at a loss to say anything really about this part, because as far as I can tell, she's got very valid points here. In something like this, I'd want to get feedback from someone like Blind Press, or maybe one of my viewers, Nick Crowell. I hope I'm saying his name correctly. Who do have visual disabilities and have had to go through this in their lives. And I'm sure it's true. There have to be certain accommodations made in educating someone with impaired vision versus everyone else. So I got nothing to say on that.
They're definitely marginalized and underrepresented, particularly in STEM.
Stop talking about representation. They don't represent anyone other than themselves. You rob someone of their individuality when you start looking at them as a symbol or as an avatar. Okay, just it really, I know I harp on this all the time, but the way that it's used specifically in education or on television or something else, it really, really takes away someone's uniqueness and just makes them nothing more than the demographic or the attribute that you're highlighting. Okay, so marginalized, it depends on the context, but this whole representation thing, just really phase it out. It does no one any good.
And that is because sciences are generally thought as being very things that you need to observe. And so most of the teaching involved with STEM are based on observation. And so it creates a lack of materials. And in anthropology, this is really heightened because although there are materials and reflections about how to incorporate blind and low vision students into lab classes in other disciplines, I found that doesn't exist for anthropology. And so I was kind of up against trying to figure that out on the fly with this student. And it ended up being a very good and helpful challenge for me.
Okay, you know what? Like I say, I don't have anything sardonic or otherwise to say about that. I can concede that for the most part. Take a second here. I'm going to try to make this more of a habit to make sure to check in with you guys as time goes on. Bridget, one of the best professors I had, helped answer simple questions at office hours. He was a patient gentleman. Nothing was a waste of time. He even talked to me about my then job, figure painting. I was about to say finger painting. Like if you can get paid doing finger painting, that's pretty cool. I'm not saying there's anything against or have anything against teachers who engage with their students and learn about them and take an interest in their lives and careers and otherwise. That's perfectly fine. I don't think it's necessarily something that students should expect a teacher to do necessarily or anticipate that they will. But hey, to each their own on that one. Wikipedia snippet. Hello, Scribelight and everybody. Hello, Snippet. How are you doing? Let's see. What else we got here? I Vercingetorix. Howdy. Wikipedia reminds you, falsifiable, Scribe. Yes, falsifiable. If you can believe it, I'm an English major, not a science major. I swear I tried. I tried a little bit. I took a meteorology class once. That's about as far as I got. The original Shroom. I know I'm late, but I just woke up. I'll start listening from the beginning. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Shroom. Hope you're doing good. And Lexi Mads. I guess we can begin now. Data Wasteland in big capital letters. Hope you're doing good. And how do you make dodgeball inclusive for visually impaired kids? Well, if you can teach a visually impaired kid to hear a wrench coming at them, then they can dodge a ball. That's the best I got in a pinch.
And so these are just examples of some of the things I use and then exist for you to use. There's a lot of graphing and things and drawing that can happen in a lab course, and raised bar graphs and things like that do exist. There's also instances where the student can draw on certain pads where the surface will be lifted. And so a lot of my focus began being how can I make this class as tactile as possible? Lucky for me, the class is already very tactile because a lot of what we do focus on casts when we're talking about primate and hominin evolution.
Okay, I have one, and she hasn't given us much information on this. And again, I'd probably do better having someone like Blind Press weigh in on this, or Nick Crowell. But is she teaching a largely visually impaired class, or was she taking all these efforts for one or two students? And this isn't me saying that, you can't have visually impaired students in an otherwise generalized classroom, but is taking this extra time using these methods efficient if you only have one or two students that it applies to? Or I guess I'd want to know, like, how did she balance out the necessary extra time and effort that would be needed to prepare all of this and make these resources available and so on, if you only have one or two students in the classroom that can really make use of it in the way that it's there for? I guess I'm more wondering about sort of the pragmatic efficiency of it versus the the efficacy. I'm sure like this all sounds perfectly fine to me and perfectly good as far as like teaching things that might be difficult for somebody who can't see to conceptualize or interact with. I mean, sounds great.
Some of the more difficult points were when we're talking about genetics, and I sort of made models of this before I realized you can go out and buy them. But there are very tactile models that are you can manipulate and change according to your teaching needs of DNA, and things like that. You can buy Braille calipers. You can buy talking tape measures. You can buy the Novit Falcon, which you can use software and create games and applications for, that is haptic, where you're not just they're feeling things that you don't necessarily have in the classroom.
Okay, again, I can't find fault with any of this. This seems awfully specific, though. Awfully specific for talking about creating equitable or inclusive classrooms. And so I guess just as one example of the kinds of efforts you can go to make that happen, I guess it just seems like this talk wasn't specifically about compensating for physical disabilities. So it kind of feels like our speaker's going off on a tangent. Just feels like it a little bit.
But also getting the sense of motion as well. And so I used a lot of combination of Braille and lifted images in order to sort of depict those things.
You're going too deep in the weeds here, lady. You really are. You didn't have to go into this much detail. You know, there are other people here that want to speak, right?
Another thing that I used, and I'm part of the class, was observation of behavior, of primate behavior. How do you have a blind student observe that? And so I changed that into being more an observation of sound. And so the student was able to hear different sounds and different calls of primates, match them to certain behaviors, and be able to actually record differences in pitch and wavelengths of sound as well in a free software. And so he did this with a para-educator, but there are ways that with screen readers that the student can be more independent as well.
Okay.
This is another example of the use of these casts, and he actually got way better than most of the sighted students at this. And the way that I integrated this first, because he had no concept of really the placement of bones in the body, was to have him use his own body. And so say, like, you know where your arm is, you can always touch that and relate that back to the actual physical object in front of him.
This is starting to become tedious. Keeverdam, thank you so much. Would you like me to send this stream to BP on Twitter? Sure. If she's awake. I mean, by the time she gets here, it might be past this point. But yeah, I mean, if timestamp it or something, and she can take a look and maybe comment on it, because I like I say, this all sounds completely reasonable. It just sounds like our speaker is far so proud of her efforts in this regard that she's going way into depth that is not relevant to the overall discussion. And it's starting to sound a little braggadocious, just a smidge.
And so we were able to look at really specific traits on bone, not just differences in size and shape. And he was able to identify different bones in the body. We used magnetic skulls as well. This happened to be around the time of Halloween. So there's plenty of those plastic skeletons around. And so with the help of disability services,
get on
we
with
created,
it, really. Come on.
This basically a mini skeleton that he could take home with a Halloween skeleton that led to Braille labels of where those bones were, so we can get an overall picture first.
Are you this efficient at giving your lesson plans in the classroom?
I also tried to do things that were tactile as far as chromosomes, because it's a really difficult thing to just describe those and how they work in creating variation. And so I tried to make on-the-fly objects that were you could manipulate and change and feel texture for. And so a lot.
Lady, if this presentation was about techniques and strategies for educating visually impaired students on complex science, you'd be right in the right lane. You have gone completely off the ranch on this. I'm sure all of this is very beneficial and useful. What is this? Get back down to the subject of the talk, please.
A lot of this was based on texture and comparison of actual objects. And so overall for this, certainly the first thing that's important is orienting the student to bench safety in the laboratory and taking the extra time to do that. You do have to get creative a little bit. Using pipe cleaners and beads is one way. It doesn't have to be expensive. You don't have to buy all of these things. This is the infographic I made to sort of help other instructors get to that process of ideas that they can use, and a lot of links are involved, and I'll give you more resources after this. But
okay, great. So are you going to go into as depth on the other demographic that you were so focused on at some point?
Parent educators, student help is really great, but I found that it's way better to try to involve all students together. They should be working together in a lab group, and it shouldn't matter if they're sighted or not.
Oh my God. Okay, guys, I'm sorry. I'm just bored listening to this. Again, I'm sure as far as I can tell, this entire section has been just sort of like, wow, yes, that makes sense when you're trying to do this. It all sounds very, very simple, very common sense. This is not talking about how you create an equitable classroom. This is so far talking about how do you modify your teaching tools to educate someone who lacks visual ability on something that, generally speaking, requires some vision to be able to conceptualize. And on that point, I got nothing to say. I'm kind of inclined to skip ahead a bit here because I want to get to supposedly what this thing was about. Okay, let's get past that. And if Blind Press gets in at some point and can and wants to at least give an assessment of what she had to say about educating visually impaired students or how to do it on science, I'd love to hear it. I mean, it sounds reasonable to me, but then I don't know. So I'm skipping ahead a little bit.
So moving on to indigenizing. So first, indigenizing is really an action verb. Again, it has to be something that you have intent behind. Creating an environment where Indigenous peoples don't have to give up what they are to fit into that environment, that they see themselves reflected in the education system in the classroom, and that it is relevant to them. And it absolutely part of that is acknowledging links between history and current social reality for them. And it's not always going to be comfortable for instructors or for some other students, but this is the kind of discomfort that can lead to changes.
So you're going to make your students inherently uncomfortable, and you're going to single out people on the basis of their heritage as special? You're going to elevate them in the classroom on the basis of what they look like. And damn anyone else who might feel like they're left out or out of place as a result? Oh, okay.
And openness that will make certain students feel like they can belong, because it's not just about the singular group, but how everybody has faced these feelings.
Or you could make a classroom that focuses primarily on academics and academic achievement, setting aside anybody's personal lives, culture, or otherwise, and unify people around a common activity of personal advancement. You could do that, you know, but of course we can't be colorblind in our thinking. No, we have to single individuals and people out on the basis of the demographic they belong to and make them special, rather than just let them live their lives and treat everybody fairly on the basis of education. Okay.
And so really the point of indigenizing is creating an environment where things can be valued from looking at an indigenous perspective.
Why is an indigenous perspective more valuable than anybody else's perspective? I mean, and how do you know just by looking at somebody that they have a perspective that is valuable? I mean, what if they don't know anything about the subject that's being taught? What if they haven't lived a life engrossed in a particular culture? What if they just happen to be a descendant of a particular people or ethnicity, but have nothing to do with it? Why? Explain to me why.
So the real need here is a general distrust of these Eurocentric higher ed based on European values.
So that's what you're teaching?
That are not generally indigenous values or don't incorporate indigenous values.
What is an indigenous value? Okay, now we're getting to something more esoteric. What is an indigenous value, and how does that conflict with a Eurocentric value? Give me an example.
It can be pretty unfair because these are unfamiliar learning styles that look at proficiency levels that are different than what indigenous students and teachers, how they present learning.
Such as what? I'm willing to believe they exist. I would appreciate it if you would tell me what you're talking about.
So there's a failure, of course, to include some of historical trauma and worldview as well throughout a course. And so students will feel ignored. And
like what? Like such as what? Failure to include or acknowledge historical trauma and worldview. Well, what are you teaching? Aren't you teaching biologic anthropology? Like what? I hate having to repeat myself, and it happens almost every time. What are you talking about? Give me an example. What is an indigenous worldview versus a Eurocentric worldview in the classroom that you find conflict with, that you have a problem with? Like what? I could probably think of some on my own right now, but I'm not the one giving the presentation. What are you talking about?
Because the material that might be taught isn't taught in a way that can be presented as relevant to indigenous students that like to take their education and use it in their own communities, you might have low retention just because of that, because it's not seen as something that is valuable in their world.
Do you know how much math I was put through that I thought at the time, I'm not going to ever use this in real life. Why am I learning this? You think that's specific to a particular culture or something? Like, I'm going to teach you something. I'm never going to use this. That's like a universal response from people depending on the subject matter. What does that have to do with being indigenous? What does that have to do with being of European descent or something? What?
It also going away to college isolates people from their community, which they feel responsible for, creates some circumstances where they might have ethnic hostility or face challenges according to transportation or socioeconomic status or having families that they have to take care of.
Yeah, because none of those things happen to anybody else outside of this one. Lady, what are you talking about? They might feel they have to do this. They might do that. Didn't you say you're a scientist? Ethnic hostility, isolation from community. When I moved away from home, I had known no other home, no other neighborhood, no other community, no other anything before I moved off to college and had to live on my own by myself, disconnected from everyone I ever knew. It was as alien an experience in a landscape as I had ever had to that point. There was a whole bunch of things I experienced just on the basis of like being disconnected from my environment. And I'm sure the same thing happened to a lot of other people, regardless of what their ethnicity was. You said before not to fall into stereotypes. What are you doing here?
All of these things that some students just might not face. And a whole lot.
The students might not face. Okay, well, what if they do and they're not indigenous? Well, then what do you do? What do you say? If someone has a common human experience, one to the other, regardless of their, genetic background, Well, then it's not unique, is it? And it might also be a point at which people can come together over a common struggle, right? You like struggle. Why are you doing this? Why are you putting people into silos like this? You said you weren't supposed to be doing that.
Lack of Indigenous role models as well in the education system. Indigenous faculty teaching Indigenous students, and so they don't see themselves there necessarily.
Oh, okay. Well, how do you solve for that problem? Well, what would you suggest be done about that? Like should only be taught by like? Or you need to hire people on the basis of their ethnicity first and foremost? What? I love it when they throw out these complaints. And then you have to imagine for a second, how would you solve for that problem? And it starts getting very murky very quickly, doesn't it?
So I like to use this learning model created by First Nations in Canada, and who actually have a lot of pull and say in how the Indigenous worldview is presented in educational environments in Canada. And so this is just one of many of these types of models.
Are you going to explain it?
And it relates to this first practice of indigenizing, which is interconnectedness or holism, where you really work with the concept that there are connections between all different varieties of knowledge, and that knowledge is connected to each other.
Well, but you just siloed knowledge. You just said that there are specific perspectives depending on what culture you're from, and that they can't intermingle because they're so different from what that was the implication I was just given. You didn't seem to be encouraging a whole lot of sharing or community or collaboration a minute ago. You said there's Indigenous and then there's this Eurocentric. And ne'er the twain shall meet. At least that's what was implied to me. But now we're trying to find the commonalities one to another. But you say that Indigenous students experience a particular thing when they're off to college for the first time and others might not. What if they might do? Am I just losing my mind here just a little bit?
It's a cycle and lifelong, and the place in which knowledge is gained and retained is important. And concept maps in general can be useful for learning and for Indigenous students because of this sort of model.
What concept maps are useful to Indigenous students because of this model? Why? Why can't they be useful for somebody who's not Indigenous? Or do you think that Indigenous people only see the world in, I don't know, artistic symbolism? What do you... I'm really trying to understand what she's saying here. It's really difficult not to come to the conclusion that our speaker is more biased about the world than I think she would want to admit to.
And this model essentially is saying that you have, for these roots, you have very many sources of knowledge. So community, self, family, ancestors, the nation, languages, environment, all these are sources of knowledge. And leading into branches and leaves, these are the different expressions of knowledge that you can get from these sources that are all modified and molded and created through the lifelong cycle from all these different types of guides.
Yeah, because things like, I don't know, the world tree as part of Eurocentric mythology obviously couldn't apply here as well. It's not, whatever.
One of which is teachers. Other guides are individuals like elders and other counselors and other mentors as well.
And how does any of that have anything to do with the classroom? What does any of this have to do with you as the educator in the classroom? All of this so far, and you'll forgive me for making an assumption here, or just an observation. All this so far, most of it sounds a lot like showing off. You know, aside from what might be completely reasonable and practical solutions to educating visually impaired students on complex scientific concepts with tools and aids and all that type of stuff, which sounds fine. But the presentation of all of this so far just says to me that look how sensitive I am to these specific things. If I was a teacher watching this, what am I going to get from this that tells me or gives me any guidance on how to be a better teacher? What does any of this mean? How is this applicable in the classroom?
So this again is, and there's even more to this model than I'll speak of here, but it's a very intricate model that has really helped me to understand how to relate everything to each other and relate it to the personal information of the student, because that is literally how that is the importance of education to many indigenous peoples.
Literally. A tree diagram. Okay, if you say so.
So going along with what indigenous pedagogies are, this is really highly related to that model as well. Using all senses and being demonstrative and relating things to each other. And
there's another voice talking alongside this that it's on the recording. I can't do anything about it, unfortunately. If you guys can hear that, it's bugging me a little bit. Hopefully they'll figure out their mic was hot and turn it off. What are indigenous pedagogies? Why are you teaching for ethnicity in your classroom? Why do you need to teach people differently, specifically on the basis of their ethnicity in the classroom? You're trying to be inclusive, but you're dividing people up on the basis of what they look like in an assumption about how their brain works and what they can and cannot understand. I don't know if you're accomplishing what you say you mean to.
Not just trial and error, but observation of what works and what does not is generally how indigenous students learn. The sense of community is extremely important, and the interconnectedness of community with the student and the learning, and land and history of the land and ancestors of land is extremely important.
And how do you introduce that into the classroom setting? What does this have to do with anything? What? So even if I accept everything you're saying as correct, and I don't do that, but just for the sake of expediency, sure, all this is correct. All right, how does this apply in the classroom? When you have a classroom of 30 or 40 students, the majority of which probably aren't indigenous, as you've already said, they're marginalized, et cetera, and so forth. Okay. So then what does this tell you to do in the classroom? What? Oh my God.
Going along with that, you have to understand that leadership typically among indigenous communities is not just horizontal, but rather vertical. And so
yeah, because every other community is obviously just horizontal. Are you listening to yourself? Do you know how power dynamics differ family to family amongst people, regardless of their backgrounds? Like my family, okay? There's me, my mother, my father, and my sister. My parents, they moved away from the, let's say, central areas of where their families came from. And so I grew up in a very small family. I don't have a whole lot of experience with large families and everybody knowing each other's business and all that kind of thing. Okay. Whereas my mother's side of the family, her sister and my cousins and everything, oh boy, do they know about big family get-togethers and everybody knowing everybody else's business and so on. You know, we all come from the same family tree. Right. But my sense of community, my sense of family and so on, and who I look up to and how everything, it's completely different from my cousins who experienced a vastly different situation. Right. Just because of location and just the way that they worked on it. What? Stop. It's driving me nuts. As she's talking about indigenous people like they are like anything that happens with them outside of a cultural context is somehow unique. It's not unique. Humans have a lot more commonality than you're giving them credit for. And you're the one talking about the tree of life thing earlier, where everybody's connected. What are you doing?
Reciprocity in learning is also important, where listening is as important, if not as more important than talking. And so this goes both ways for students and for instructors.
Did you know that only Indigenous people learn to listen? Did you know that, guys? That only Indigenous people really listen to other people.
Listening and taking the time to hear out an anecdote of a student that maybe you know right away relates to the concept you're talking about is important for their sense of belonging and is a different way of expressing their personal knowledge. Along with this, you might have elders of the community in your courses, and recognizing them as elders is also really important to maintaining the community in the class for Indigenous students. Because
are you teaching an exclusively Indigenous class? Maybe I missed something. Maybe I missed something in here, because I thought she was talking about teaching an inclusive classroom where not all of the students had visual impairment, and that the Indigenous students were marginalized. Boy, oh boy.
There's a level of respect and a level of knowledge that they are considered to have. And so.
Well, you mean older people have knowledges that younger people don't, regardless of their cultural background? What? Oh, no, sorry. Elders are only respected and valued and an important part of a community if you happen to be a particular ethnicity, obviously, because Eurocentric cultures hate old people. Oh, man, if you're an old person with like status and education and knowledge and everything else, no, to hell with you. We only care about young people. And we know you care about young people because of the color of your skin. What?
So if they are not sort of respected in that way by the instructor, it can cause kind of confusion and by the students, the elder, and really block that belonging, that sense of belonging.
Did that happen to you? Did an elder of the Indigenous community show up and you were disrespectful? Is that something you learned directly, or are you just making this up as you go along?
And also need to realize that, and this happens in some of my classes,
okay,
not all knowledge is meant to be shared with everybody. And so recognizing that some knowledge is personal and sacred, and that you have to have permission or certain situations in which the knowledge is shared is important. So I'm not poking at a student to tell you about the burial practices of their community is pretty important.
When would you poke at someone to ask them about the burial practices of their community? What? What goes on in your classroom where that would come up? Like, I'm obviously coming from a different planet. If I see someone, and I guess I can assume by their skin color, because that's what we're working with these days, according by our speaker, that maybe, and I put a big maybe on that because you don't know, but maybe they grew up in a different culture from myself. Maybe. Okay, in what instance would I then go, hey, how do your people treat the dead? It's just... Can we get somebody else to talk now? This lady's been going on for almost half an hour. Come on.
They can share it if they want to, but there are certain things that...
Okay, you know what? No, I'm done. I am done with our speaker. I don't know what else she has to say on this. I am moving on. I want to hear somebody else talk. This wasn't supposed to be a one-person show here. This was supposed to be 3 speakers going across different ideas, and so far we have been stuck. How long does she go? Good gravy. What? Good. What the heck? We're halfway. I'm nearly halfway through the entire presentation. Does she?
Everybody's happy.
She's still talking. Are you done? Oh my God. That lady took up 35 minutes of an hour and 15 long. Jeez.
That is going to be useful for people. I just wanted to mention, Sam, that we had a request for you to possibly share your PowerPoints. And would you be willing to do that?
Yeah, and actually one of them is shared, but yeah, I'll give you
okay
links, and they will be in those drive boxes as well. So yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Cow.
I think there are already some questions out there and things people want to say, but
Yeah, well, I got plenty of questions and things I've already said, but man, that was something else.
because I want to make sure we get to our other speakers.
Yeah.
We're going to go next to Nishan Borden. Nishan, do you want to start off?
Hello, everyone. So my name is Nishan Borden. I'm an assistant professor in the counseling department. I am a recent graduate of my doc program, and this is my first academic appointment. So I started at ISU last fall in the midst of a pandemic. I moved to Idaho from Florida. So a lot of big changes in a small amount of time. And I say that because I think a lot of my personal identities impact the way that I create an equitable environment in my classroom, right?
Your personal identities. Okay.
Because students want to know me, so they can feel safe sharing this information with me. So I don't have a PowerPoint. I had one that was like 3 slides, but Dr. Sam made that one that I don't want to share anymore. So
What the heck is going on here? Well, good for you. You didn't come with a full-on lecture for everybody to take up half an hour. Because, good gravy. All right. Well, I appreciate our second speaker just sort of like, I'll just give you my initial thoughts and then we can have a discussion. Because I don't think this was meant to be the Sam show.
I'll just spend the next 10 minutes or so talking about some of my experiences and really just reinforcing a lot of the things that Dr. Sam already shared with us.
Yeah, since Dr. Sam really took up all the air in the room.
So definitely thinking about creating an equitable environment being an ongoing thing, right? So from my first class all the way into my last class, I'm checking in with students to see how is this landing with them? How does this feel for them? Do they feel safe in this environment? So I'm in the counseling profession, which is very different from STEM. It's all about feelings and communication. And in counseling, we are the tool, right? So the relationships that we build with our clients are really the mechanism for change. So when we think about training counseling students or counselors in training to go out and work in the community, we not only want to instill the core content of our profession, but we also want to see students be able to display the core dispositions.
Okay, what are the core dispositions of a counseling student that you attempt to instill?
So we want students that are culturally humble.
Culturally humble. Okay.
Mindful, empathetic, engaging, curious, reflexive. So not only are we trying to create an environment where they can learn how to be a counselor and those skills, but also how to just be with people and make them feel comfortable. So from our first class, we're working on those things. So I was very lucky that I came into a program where that is already the culture. So I didn't have to build that culture from the ground up because those are things that are already happening.
Examples, please.
So from the very first class, and I'll use the cultural counseling class as an example, which is a class where we talk about how culture impacts the counseling relationship. So we're asking students to talk about their spiritual or religious beliefs or not, students who don't identify with any spiritual or religious group, their racial and ethnic identities, their social, economic status, all of these different topics that students are not really used to talking about in a classroom environment.
Yeah, they're not usually used to talking about them in a classroom environment because for the most part, they're irrelevant to academic achievement and study. Unless you're looking at like a comparative cultural class or something and you can bring something directly personal to that or some knowledge or what. Okay, why? Why do I need to talk to you about my religious beliefs in becoming a counselor? Maybe there's some utility to it.
So from the first class, I am open with my positionality. I'm a Black woman. I'm in Idaho. I'm probably the first Black teacher you have ever had, right?
Well, you wouldn't be if I were taking classes now. What does any of that say about you? What is your race, gender, and or the state you were born in? What does that say? What can I assume to know about you as a person, as an individual, based on that information?
So even though I have maybe marginalized identities in the culture of our society, in this environment, I am in a position of power as an instructor.
Again, what does any of that tell me about you as an individual? Your appearance, the location of your birth, and the professional title you hold. I mean, what is that? I know nothing about your character. I know nothing about your attitude. I know nothing about your philosophy on life. Nothing. I don't even know your name. So what?
So if we're going to be talking about big topics like racism.
Why are we talking about big topics like racism? In counseling specifically, why are we talking about quote unquote big topics like racism? Why? To what end? Thank you, Derek LaRue. Good morning to you, Derek LaRue. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Your support is ridiculously generous, and I thank you again. Hope you're having a good Sunday so far. Okay, why are we talking about racism?
Students are scared that they're going to say the wrong thing and offend me.
Well, you're the one bringing it up. Students are afraid they're going to say the wrong thing and offend you. Why are you talking about it in the first place? Why make it an issue at all? Why is your race important to quote unquote talk about as though it says anything about you at all?
So from the first meeting, I'm trying to lessen that power differential and say, look, we all make mistakes.
What?
Our goal here is to learn and to be honest and open about our feelings.
Wait. I thought you were talking, when did racism become the primary subject matter? I thought you were talking about instilling in your students the primary dispositions, the core dispositions of your discipline. So what?
I'm also asking students to talk about politics, things that people normally also don't talk about in class.
Why are you asking them to talk about that? What does this have to do with counseling? I mean, maybe it does. I don't know. How does talking about racism and or politics relate directly back to counseling other people? I guess it depends on what you're counseling them on, but I don't understand.
Because in the counseling field, the personal is political, and politics impacts mental health outcomes. So I'm asking students not to say who you voted for, but
if you're wait, what? I'm asking you to talk about politics. I'm not asking you to tell me who you voted for. I'm just asking about your politics, which mental health outcomes. I mean, I'll admit in the last 7 or 8 years specifically, someone's personal politics and how that interacts with other people's personal politics does have an effect on mental health outcomes, but geez.
But how does this climate impact our clients, right? So I'm always trying to put it back into the context of our clients. And
okay, give me an example of what you're talking about. What do you mean? What does that have to do with anything? Where am I going to counsel people and on what basis, for what reason? What is my goal, and what does their personal politics or my personal politics have to do with anything? I mean, unless you're saying, and this might be true, if I have a particular political philosophy or perspective, and I have to go counsel somebody who possesses a political perspective that is directly opposed to my own, right? Do I have to like retain the humility to look beyond that and see them as a person and not as a political avatar? You're talking about that, because that I could understand, right? You have to set aside a lot of your own personal biases or perspectives or things and get to the core of the individual aside from all of that if you're going to counsel them on a particular thing. That I could understand. But that's not what you're saying so far. So I'm having to fill in all the blanks here by myself.
I think being upfront with what I think, it makes it safe for students to be able to share those things.
Why is it important? What does it matter to the students? If you're teaching them the basics of how to go through their discipline, absent a political assessment, absent a racial assessment, doesn't that just show that they're irrelevant to the subject matter? You have to tell me, as the audience here, why is it relevant to know someone's racial background or whatever, or their political ideology or opinions as pertains to being a counselor? Like I said, I could imagine a scenario where you might have to take that into consideration or learn the internal tools to set those biases aside when you're interacting with people that may disagree with you. But why aren't you saying that?
So I also think about these ideas, equity versus equality, right?
Oh yeah, equity versus equality, equality of opportunity versus equality of outcome. Yes.
So I'm not trying to create an environment in my classes where every student gets the same thing, because that
Okay, so you're not actually promoting equity. Very good.
doesn't work, right? So I'm trying to create an environment where every student gets what they need. And an example of that is, I go back to this cultural course, and we have students who, have very conservative religious beliefs, and students who are completely on the opposite spectrum of that, and might feel marginalized or oppressed in their beliefs in that classroom, but they are not marginalized or oppressed in big society. So creating a space where students on both ends of the spectrum can talk about those things in some kind of middle ground.
Why do I need to talk to you about my conservative religious beliefs in a counseling? I'm obviously missing something. I'm obviously missing something vital here, because I don't like. I took a class in college called the Bible as Literature. Okay. And the teacher at the beginning of the class came out and he said to people, I've taught this class several times, and just so we're clear, this is not a Bible study class. This is looking at the Bible as a piece as a literary work. Okay, we're gonna work through this without the ideology, without the dogma, without the religion specifically or the spirituality. This is just looking at the text. And I understood that, right? I understood that from the jump. My family's not particularly religious. I was curious to see what this class had to say about things, and so I went it from that perspective. But a lot of the students in the classroom decided to ignore that, and they essentially tried to turn it into a Bible study. And when certain topics came up, they would talk about them in a theological viewpoint rather than a textual viewpoint. And it became very, very bizarre class. And I remember this. You want to talk about feeling marginalized? Okay. So I came to the class as a textual basis, or a lot of the class came to it from a theological basis. And we had at one point to give a assessment of our thoughts on the book of Genesis. And so I it came around to me as when it was my turn to speak, let me put it that way. I said, there's a lot of evidence in this story that God is omnipotent, as in all powerful. He created the trees and the animals and the rivers and the world and all that kind of stuff. But then I said, there's not a lot of evidence in this story that God is omniscient, as in he knows everything, because he's constantly surprised by the actions of his creations, and he's constantly upset by their decisions, right? So either he completely lacks the foreknowledge of what's about to happen, which means he's not omniscient, or he knows what they're going to do, but he decides to punish them anyway for things that are effectively part of his own design. And the very instant I suggested that the God of Genesis was fallible in some fashion, you should have seen the daggers in the eyes of everyone in that classroom who thought it was a theology class or should be a theology class or were trying to make it a theology class as they turned their heads towards me in absolute hatred. It was something else. I hadn't experienced anything quite like that to that point. That was my first experience of feeling religiously persecuted on the flip side, if you know what I mean. But that's all to say, what does any of this have to do with becoming a counselor? And why do I need to reveal to you my personal religious beliefs in this classroom? How does that achieve equality, equity, inclusion, or anything else? Please, I'm going to give it another couple of minutes here.
It's been important. So I talked a lot about, I want to model this way of being from our very first class. So I'm honest with students about how things make me feel, about when I'm uncomfortable, and I encourage them to do the same. Things that I do well. Students want to know when I was a counselor, they want to know times when I messed up, times when I got it wrong, because that makes them feel like they have permission to also make mistakes and get things wrong.
Yeah, okay, you're a teacher and you're giving them the benefit of your experience. Sure, okay.
So from the very first class, I'm working on ways to model this way of being that we are expecting from our counselors in training.
This way of being. Okay.
Also, like Dr. Sam mentioned, I want to diversify the curriculum. So I want to include diverse voices from the counseling field in our syllabus. And I also want to include diverse mediums. So I have videos, I have podcasts, I have movies, I have guest speakers, right? So
how do you define diversity, might I ask? Are you talking about a range of experience and disciplines in counseling different people on different subjects, that kind of diversity? That's what you mean, right? Diversity of skills and knowledge, right?
All of these different perspectives are being invited into our classroom so students can find different things that they can connect with. It's really hard. I found that it's hard for students to do all the reading, but if I put a podcast up, everyone will listen. That makes a big difference.
Yeah, if you put a videotape in front of the students, they'll look at the magic light box for a while, so you don't actually have to do any real teaching or work.
I also try to make sure that I'm very intentional about taking assessment of student needs. So as I mentioned, I started teaching here in a pandemic, and students are really overwhelmed, not just with the course material, but also just with the state of the world. So I asked students, what would be the best day for you to turn in this assignment? It's no point in me having students turn in assignments on Fridays at 11:59 when I'm going to be asleep anyway, right?
Yeah, why set expectations or expect your students to have the discipline to get things in on time? Yeah, why do that? Why instill in them a sense of responsibility and accountability for their work? I don't know. I guess, whenever you feel like it. Yeah, whatever. It's okay. Whatever. Maybe I'm just old-fashioned in my sense of instilling responsibility on a schedule, discipline, expectations in people. Being adult about setting a deadline and holding yourself to it. I don't know.
So I want to have a day that works best for the students. So even
how about the 12th of never?
Things like that I've found have made the environment feel more accessible and welcoming, especially for adult learners who have responsibilities outside of what they're being asked to do in our graduate program. Dr. Sam spoke to encouraging the voice of students from minoritized or marginalized backgrounds. And that's also something that I want to do, but I also want to do it in a way that it doesn't require extra emotional labor from students, right? I'm a Black person, but I cannot speak for all Black people. So I'm just giving you my experience with a certain thing.
So why even highlight your skin color at all? If your skin color is irrelevant to your perspective, why even bring it up? Why make it an issue amongst your students? Why separate your students out on the basis of their skin color and assume that they need either, special handling or they can't manage this subject, or I need to. Why? You just said it yourself. Your skin color and your gender say nothing about you speaking for anyone else, because you don't represent anyone other than yourself. Why bring them up?
And I'm not calling on students to share their experience and put them in a position to further feel uncomfortable, if that's what that will lead to.
Well, then why are you making them talk about their personal religious beliefs? Why are you assuming to know anything about their background or their lived experience on the basis of their ethnicity? What? Okay. I feel like all that time I spent listening to Dr. Sam was, for the most part, a waste. And I'm kind of upset about that. I was hoping for something more structured. I feel like, though, it's not fair to just cut things off here and not continue with it. So there will be a part 2. The part 2 might happen midweek this week. So if you're interested in that for whatever reason, yes, I will put myself through continuing torture of listening to this panel discussion, because I don't feel like I should leave this one behind. But I am coming up on the end of what I would usually call a show, and I don't want to go any further than this for my own sanity. I take it in doses. But I'll take a minute or 3 here for you guys and see what you have to say on the subject. My knee is permanently shit, but I'm not sure what I've done to make it so bad. I'm guessing it's Swedish weather, but it's out of hand, so I have no clue. You know, I think you and Dr. Sam might have each gotten a participation award in things that have nothing to do with anything, but I'm still curious. You didn't know what you did to your knee. Do you sit a particular way? Like when you sit in a chair and you got your like legs crossed or something, are you putting more pressure on one foot than the other? Like it just in mundane situations where you're in a particular position, do you favor one leg over the other over long periods of time? I've noticed that in myself. Like after I've been sitting around a while, I'll get up and I'll move around, and one leg will feel a lot stiffer than the other one because I've had it like torqued in a particular angle that I don't notice while I'm doing it, but only afterwards. Just an idea. Insulted 25. Scribe is attributing something like omniscience that he has already gotten from a modern understanding of the Bible to the text. Well, no, just the difference of the definitions of those two words. Omnipotence versus omniscience. All powerful versus all knowing. That's just, yeah, it's a literal understanding of the words as applied to the text. So yeah, you know, because if God supposedly knows my heart, my soul, my intentions, if he can see within my soul and so on, that is a type of knowing things about people that no one else can possess in a, you know, on the temporal plane, let's say. So if he actually possesses that kind of omniscience, then he should not be surprised and or angry by the eventual actions of his creations. That was my argument in reading the text. And also, it admittedly, comparing it to what is said about God, and as I've been exposed to the idea over the course of my lifetime, and also what is intimated about the character in many other elements of the Bible. So that's all that came from. Let's see. Matt, what kids would be marginalized in class but not in large society? I don't know. Our professionals are throwing these concepts and these ideas out there without giving any context or any direct examples or really just justifying, like, why would you do this? What is the academic value of taking this action? Right? Throughout everything that Dr. Sam was saying, I kept saying, both out loud and to myself, how does this help a student learn math more effectively? How does this help a student understand biology or anthropology more effectively? Setting aside the stuff about the visually impaired student, that stuff seemed, as far as I could tell, fairly practical. That's also was very mechanical, very pragmatic. That seemed fine to me. Everything else surrounding this whole equity, so on, and marginalized and representation, what does that? What does any of that do to improve a student's academic outcome? What? I don't know. Let's see. Shadowclaw, did you think I am in danger in a classroom of daggers? Well, I was. Nothing happened in particular at that time because I think we did that part of the class early enough on in the day that by the time the class was over, some time had passed and maybe I was forgotten about. But if the class had ended right there, I had wondered if I was going to be educated by some of the people in the classroom after that point. Nothing untoward happened, but it just the looks and some of the things that were I got a definite feeling that I was not a popular person among several people in the classroom at that point. And I think even if I remember correctly, even the teacher kind of noticed that and sort of like, yeah, it's hard to explain after the fact. It was many, many years ago, but it was something that has been ingrained in my brain. Lexi, no, not really. My knee cartilage is almost gone, but I'm not sure if I've done a ligament or torn something. Thank you for carrying, though. I've been laid up for a week now. Ay, caramba. That's no good. Well, what is it that they say you should like actual like gelatin supplements or not? Maybe it's not gelatin. What's the word I'm looking for? Starts with collagen. That's what I'm thinking of. Collagen supplements. Is that supposed to help? That's what I've heard. Derek LaRue, they want to divide students, parents, and their culture. Well, I mean, they talk about inclusion. They talk about equity and or equality, depending on how they decide to define it on the day. But then they want to divvy everybody up and highlight people on the basis of differences. And not in the sense of like a tolerance or an understanding, but to put them up as almost, dare I say it, supreme compared to others. Oh, we have to understand the indigenous ways of knowing, for they are so much more pure and better than anybody who comes from a Eurocentric version of knowing things. As you're already drawing lines between people and just continuing divisions and conflicts. You're not helping to resolve them or helping to move past them. And some people think moving past means forgetting or dismissing. That's not what it means. It's trying to understand that things change and things can get better, and that old rivalries and old divisions and old wars and old deeds don't have to define everybody forever. You know, if you don't allow any chance for redemption by constantly drilling it into people that there are differences and evils of the past, nothing's going to change. Nothing will develop. You'll just keep reinforcing and galvanizing those things into the future. But with that, everybody, as I said, I'm going to call it here. I'm going to do a part 2 on this. For my own reference, I am at 43:24 on the video. So if you want to join me for that, I'll be doing that probably, I'm guessing, Tuesday. I'm going to say Tuesday, might be Wednesday. But if you want to find out or follow along as I announce new things that I'll be ending up doing, be sure to follow me on Twitter down there at the bottom of the corner of the screen at scribe_light. So keep an eye on that. I'll be doing it Tuesday or Wednesday, maybe midday-ish. I don't want to start stepping on the schedules of some of my other YouTube friends who have shows going on those days as well. So it'll be a special supplement. I'll go through the rest of it, at least as much as I can stomach. Beyond that, you can find me here every Thursday at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern for TED Excellence, where I'll go over another off-brand TED Talk. And as well, just newsflash, tentatively, and I say tentatively because things can change, tentatively, sometime the weekend of February 4th, so either that Saturday or that Sunday, depending, so stay tuned, I'll be doing only my second edition of Living on Borrowed Crime, starring a one-on-one interview with Dave's Lemonade. If you're not aware of Dave's Lemonade True Crime on YouTube, look him up. He's the only Dave's Lemonade I know of. He does these highly in-depth, highly reflective, and analytical looks at things like the To Catch a Predator episodes, but recently he's gone into long-form true crime content on looking at trial footage and in-depth on cases of different crimes and different scandals and things. So go check out Dave's Lemonade and see if you like that kind of stuff. If you do, be sure to let him know that you do by hitting that like button. And so I'm hoping to have him as a guest on for an interview of Living on Borrowed Crime the weekend of the 4th of February. Stay tuned for that. Very excited. Otherwise, everybody, thank you so much for joining me. I hope you all learned something or unlearned something, as the case may be, depending on the situation. If you have anything more to say on it that I didn't get to in the chat, please leave a comment. I will be sure to look at them. Don't know if I'll respond to all of them depending on the time, but I'll do my best to. As well, on your way out, if you hit the like button if you like the stream. If you didn't like the stream, be sure to hit the dislike button, because either way, I appreciate your feedback. And with that, everyone, thank you for joining me. Moderators, thank you for keeping an eye on things. Even though everyone here is so well behaved, you have very, very little to do. Everybody who donated either to myself or to the fundraisers pinned to the top of the chat box, thank you guys so much for your generosity. I really do appreciate it, and I'm sure the families of our friends do as well. With that, I hope you all have a good rest of your Sunday. I hope you have a good rest of your weekend. If you have the 3-day weekend, congratulations. If you don't, well, have a good day at work on Monday. And I hope you're all safe and well. If you are not well, please get well soon, and I'll see you on the next one. Take care. Bye-bye.